coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
I do think it is kind of a remarkable achievement when you look at it and think about it. You're talking about a bill that brings together the priorities of Jim Banks and Chip Roy and Lisa Murkowski. Yeah, that's remarkable.
It's a motley crew.
It's first and foremost a testament, I think, to Donald Trump and to the recognition that he is the center of political gravity and dictates the agenda. And people can push and bob and weave and try to advance their own agendas within that context. But at the end of the day, he's the leader. He's going to get what he wants. And he did. And he got a lot of help from Mike Johnson and John Thune and others to get it there. But they listen to him and they take direction from him. And it's very reflective of him insofar as it's the priorities that he set out to achieve in this bill.
Welcome, everyone, once again to the Roundtable, the editors and publishers podcast at the American Mind at the Claremont Institute. I am your host, Ryan Williams, president of the Claremont Institute and publisher of the Claremont Review books and the American Mind. Spencer is out this week, having just hiked up Mount Whitney. We can ask him all about it next week. So I'm joined by managing editor Mike Sabo, who's back from his own vacation over the 4th, or the week of the 4th, and Andrew Beck, a new voice here on the podcast. Many of you know Andrew from his work at Beck & Stone, where he's founder and principal. He's also our VP of Communications on loan while we revamp some of our comms and marketing in the coming year or so. Have been doing it for a year. Andrew's a man about town in DC and New York. Those of you who've been out at events have probably met him. Doing great work. Has built a lot of the websites that we all know and love, including the American Mind, First Things, well, built or redesigned, I should say. First Things, New Criterion, and many others, corporate clients included. So it's good to have Andrew. We wanted to start today with a bit of self-promotion. We, I don't know if we teased this last week or not, maybe, but on Saturday in San Diego at a, now I can disclose the location, a beloved place for me, having grown up playing golf there, the Rancho Santa Fe Country Club, we honored Vice President JD Vance with our Statesmanship Award. And he gave about 35 minutes of remarks. And then he had to go because he's a busy man and was there with family on vacation. So we ate some dinner, and then Charlie Kirk, who was our master of ceremonies, and myself and Mike Anton had a bit of a roundtable conversation. It was a great event, very small for an annual gala for us, given the time constraints and having to book a decently elegant venue in San Diego on a few weeks' notice. So it was about 135 people. So everyone was really in the action. Vance's speech is now up at Blaze and linked on our social media stuff if you guys want to check it out. Some of you may have, by the time, especially this recording drops tomorrow, Thursday, you'll maybe have seen it. I commend it to you all. Vance, talked about, while he framed his remarks at the beginning and end with Mamdani, this is a raging debate in the Williams household about whether it's worth talking about Mamdani or whether we should just be depriving him of oxygen and ignoring him. I think it's a phenomenon too interesting and important to ignore, but the good Mrs. Williams disagrees. We'll see. If he's in the next mayor, she can just claim she was right and we should have froze him out, but we'll see. Vance wanted to talk about the odd left-wing kind of progressive populist coalition in contradistinction to Trump's and Vance's coalition. Theirs being multi-ethnic, working and middle class, among other things, and Mamdani's being drawn predominantly from white liberal, under 40, maybe under 45 enclaves in fancy, well, not fancy, but in various segments of the 5 boroughs of New York City. And then he talked a bit about the importance of building, the importance of Western civilization and American civilization, and the positive vision that we ought to advance going forward. And then ended with a kind of rousing and passionate denunciation of Mamdani, a recent citizen of 6 years or so, who came to America with his family fleeing violence. And now he has the temerity and the ingratitude, is how Vance pitched it, to give a pretty ambiguous 4th of July statement about the incomplete work of America, the contradictory nature of American justice, and all the rest. So it was a great privilege and honor for us to get a bit of the VP's time. Again, please go watch the speech. Let us know what you think. What do you think, Andrew? You were there.
The speech itself, I think, may turn out to be quite historic because of what you described. JD is firing a shot across the bow of this really a Marxist coalition. These are various aggrieved, yes, they are white liberals, but many of them are also recent immigrants who have come here and have not quite got the life that they thought they were going to get. Maybe some went through college and they were anticipating really being the beneficiaries of this sort of activist industrial complex that so many of our institutions, federal or state and local level, really embrace, particularly in blue states. Now, once federal funding is cut off, once the markets correct, inevitably, as happens with all socialist wealth transfer schemes, the people that were counting on that for their sustenance, they're now very upset. They're aggrieved. And so what used to be this sort of Fabian, champagne socialist, steady march to a socialist utopia now turns into a Bolshevik revolution. And I think that is why JD is wise to get out ahead of it. And it is good for us to talk about it. And the bottom line, I think, is what he brings up, that the gratitude that we should have for this nation, that we have something that is very special, that is unseen in other parts of the world to this day, let alone the rest of history, that we should be thankful for it and we should be grateful that we can be part of it. And then we must actually participate in it. And I loved how he ended with that this is something about participation, that being in America, being an American means participating in the project. It means assimilating. It means becoming an American. It means loving this country. And it means being part of the work that we feel that we have to do now to truly make it great, not just for ourselves. He brought up his children, right? He wants this America for his children and for his descendants. We all need to be having that type of mentality. And this is not the mentality that this Marxist populism that is coming out of the left is about.
Yeah, I mean, and echoing some of Inez Stepman's comments from last week's podcast, Vance was echoing them in the sense that this is really a movement to a certain extent, as you point out, not completely, but to a certain extent, of young white liberal resentment, in a way, of where they think they should be in their level of comfort and where they are. And Vance went out of his way just briefly to say, we shouldn't in turn resent them or criticize them for feeling like they haven't really gotten what they were bargained in the whole mix of things. So we have to understand the roots of their resentment if we're going to do anything about it. But it is nonetheless a big driving factor of the Mamdani phenomenon. I don't know, Mike, what did you think?
No, I think Andrew points out an important problem, which is you contrast, how Vance came out very strongly to how the Republicans, ever since AOC stepped in, how they've kind of treated her, kind of a sideshow, kind of a joke, not really to be taken seriously. And I think we're seeing that probably was not the right approach, that I think you really need to head this off. You need to get the Hydra right now before it really sprouts, many more heads. And that, because there is real resentment out there, and there is a grain of truth in that. I mean, the economy, has changed in some fundamental ways that I think we still need to grapple with. The bureaucracy is out there stifling self-government. And so, and I even kind of go back to the New Left, where you read Tom Hayden, you read some of these guys at Berkeley, and it's like, okay, there's something there. I mean, they did identify that there are some issues with the kind of, corporatist liberalism of that time, of the 50s and the early 60s. Like, there is a problem here. But what they want to replace it with at that time was some LSD romanticism that was absolutely going to go nowhere. I mean, just kind of a fig leaf kind of covering nihilism. Now you're almost having, the the in-group, the actual billionaires, and Vance pointed this out, one of the contradictions of liberalism is they're really kind of critiquing themselves. So, and that's just an interesting phenomenon, kind of all the contradictions within liberalism, attacking a billionaire class that's actually pretty much mostly on the left. I mean, you look at the money, the left has far more money and far more billionaires, railing against white people when you look at, say, the Democratic Party, basically run by white people. And it's really this kind of idea of self-abnegation, of hatred. And it's like they have to put that vicariously through kind of the outgroup. And that's how they express it. So I think that he's highlighting some very important animating principles of the left. And then in contrast, saying, look, statesmanship is not just about tearing down and identifying the problem, which is important. That's the first part. But it's actually about building. It's about, what Trump is doing, actually trying to create, some semblance of greatness, trying to kind of call the American people back to what they once were, try to reinstill and reinvigorate some sense of self-government that allows us to thrive. And that, look at what the left has done, but look at what we need to do. There are so many frontiers still there. The spirit is still there. So I think that forward-looking message is extremely important. I think will serve him well in the years ahead, especially in 2028.
Yeah, speaking of white, well-educated liberals, I just wanted to transition here to discuss a bit or tie some threads together on the left at the moment. They may seem disparate, but we'll land this plane. First, just flagging this piece that Blaze Media put out, drawing on an Axios piece. The Blaze headline is, "White, well-educated Democrats are demanding lawmakers get shot to prove they're anti-Trump as deadly violence rises." Let me just read you the opening graphs so you can get a flavor of this. While President Donald Trump continues to deliver big wins for the American people, the Democrat base is becoming increasingly desperate. Several Democrat lawmakers have expressed concerns as their constituents grow increasingly frustrated with what they view as inaction. We've got people who are already desperately wanting us to do something. No matter what we say, they want more. Democrat Representative Brad Schneider of Illinois said, "Some of them have suggested what we really need to do is be willing to get shot," another Democrat said. These lawmakers, most of whom spoke to Axios on the condition of anonymity, also said most of these voters were white, well-educated, and live in upscale suburban or urban neighborhoods. What I have seen is a demand that we get ourselves arrested intentionally or allow ourselves to be victims of violence. And a lot of times that's coming from economically very secure white people, one Democrat said. Not only would that be a gift to Donald Trump, not only would it make the job of Republicans in Congress easier if we were all mired in legal troubles, we are a group that is disproportionately people of color, women, LGBTQ people, people who do not fare very well in prison. Democrats are growing increasingly concerned that the grassroots base is expecting bloodshed as penance for Trump's historic victory in November 2024 and all his administration has accomplished since then. Our own base is telling us that what we're doing is not good enough, that there needs to be blood to grab the attention of the press and the public, one Democrat said. It's like the Roman Colosseum. People just want more and more of this spectacle, another Democratic lawmaker said. Well, actually, there are some members, perhaps fringe members of that left-wing base, who are perpetrating bloodshed themselves. Recent headline, which a lot of you caught sight of, I'm sure. This is just from The Guardian. It's been reported elsewhere, of course. 10 charged with attempted murder after allegedly ambushing Texas ICE agents. Federal prosecutors described planned ambush with intent to kill ICE correction officers on 4th of July in Alvarado, Texas. And then the 10 people that have been charged, if you look at their mugshots, there are 4 women allegedly in this photo, but it appears to me that at least 3 of them are male to female trans, quote unquote, women. And it ties to this other insane story. It's not too far afield, but it's worth just referencing that and then commenting, and we'll get rolling on this. But this is a piece about the Zizians, which we had brought up a while back. It's probably been a year or so, or a year and a half. This is definitely a Poulos beat, a James Poulos beat. You'll not be surprised to learn he was tracking this thing. The headline from the New York Times over the weekend, a somewhat medium long piece, is "She wanted to save the world from AI, then the killing started." And it's about this male to female trans, Ziz Lasota, and her cult of sorts, who started referring to themselves as Zizians. Here's just a little color from the middle of that piece, or the middle beginning anyway. Ziz, who grew up in Alaska as the oldest of 3 siblings, was homeschooled for some of her childhood. As a preteen boy, Ziz grew depressed. She saw puberty as evil. She later wrote on her blog sincerely and was horrified at the idea that she would be killed overwritten by a new self. That's a quote. She began to feel like the world was a hypothetical. A key epiphany was realizing that even if she couldn't fix her own problems, she could make things better for others. One of the happiest thoughts I've ever had, she wrote. In the early 2010s, while attending the University of Alaska, Fairbanks, where her father taught instructional design, she studied computer science. She's very worried about the risk posed by AI and their followers of some of these AI doomers who think that as soon as we cross the threshold of fully intelligent AI, that AI will wipe us all out. Skipping a little bit, for a time, Ziz found a community in the rationalist scene. She attended house parties. This is a group of AI skeptics in San Francisco Bay Area. Attended house parties, meetups, and workshops organized by the Center for Applied Rationality. She posted on Less Wrong, weighing in on topics like logical paradoxes and optimizing decision-making. Soon she started taking hormones and posting under the name Ziz, a villain in an online fantasy story, often wearing a black cape and addressing people with names like Master Jedi. She claimed her religion was Sith, the Darth Vader-aligned order in Star Wars. Ziz stood out. Anyway, it's a story of her and a few compatriots first stabbing their landlord who wanted to evict them after the moratorium on evictions was up post-COVID. Then they traveled to Pennsylvania, and one or two of them, it's unclear, the police weren't able to charge any of them, although the gun ballistics matched, or the ammunition anyway, matched the guns in the possession of one of those members of the Zizians. One of them, or a group of them, or who knows, killed that person's parents. They later, another one associated with the group later went back to that same landlord that they'd stabbed and finished him off because they were worried he might testify. Anyway, they're all under trial, or Ziz and a few others are under trial in Allegheny County in Pennsylvania for murder and other things. I just wanted to tie all these things together to say, something sort of dark is brewing on the left. It has been for some time for those of us observing 2020 and its aftermath and the Trump derangement syndrome that has possessed a lot of the left-wing base. But it seems like a portion of the very young left-wing base, and you see this in Greta Thunberg and some of the doomers on the young left on the question of the climate. You see it here with AI. You're seeing a real turn to violence. And if you look at analyzers of domestic stages of civil war and conflict, we're well along into the mercenary kind of assassination phase. And I suspect now that ICE has a budget that's larger than the Marine Corps, and they're going to ramp up deportations. Unfortunately, this, I think, will be portentous of things to come. We'll see. This has been a theme for us for weeks, including the discussion of Mamdani. We'll see how the left is going to deal, or at the center left anyway, the mainstream of the Democratic Party is going to deal with all of this kind of witch's brew of mental illness, somehow tied to a certain view of gender and transness. I don't want to freight too much with that or make too much of a causal connection, but the takeaway really is that the youth on the left, the kids on the left are not all right. And it's rippling out into our politics and culture.
And this kind of reminds me, again, just to go back to the new left, I remember reading Brian Burroughs' book, Days of Rage, where about the 60s and the 70s and the Weather Underground and the bombing of the Pentagon and the Capitol and all the kind of disparate splinter groups and cells that were out around that time on the left that were doing real violence, setting bombs. Bill Ayers, Bernadine Dorn, many, many others. You see, the Mansons at that time and kind of what they did. Best captured by Quentin Tarantino's latest movie. So this is really in the left's kind of DNA. You really see, the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Yeah, like you said, Ryan, you don't want to go too far, but I mean, there definitely seems to be just some kind of connection at some point to, if they don't get what they want, they're obviously dispirited. Trump has won again. We'll talk about this in the next segment. The big, beautiful bill has passed. No matter how many missteps or whatever you think, Trump is making, at the granular level, I mean, he is winning. He's kind of FDR, and his opponents don't really know what to do. So, of course, their foot soldiers are, I think, just going to get more and more radical. And it'll be, like you said, I can see, people like Andrew Sullivan, calling this out, some people on the center left who obviously are going to be horrified at this kind of thing. But, you really wonder all the huge network of groups, Antifa, that's, I think this was an Antifa cell in North Texas in one of the attacks on ICE facilities. I think there were two actually over the weekend, and the 7th and then the 4th. One of them was a North Texas Antifa cell. So this is going to be something I think, we should be investigating more and more and more. The Trump administration, should certainly be aware of these things. I'm sure that they are, because, without kind of a pressure valve, we'll see what happens with the 2026 midterms. But I don't think that's really going to pacify these people. I mean, the GOP map looks pretty good for the Senate. The House may be up for grabs, but that's not going to be enough for these people. So I think just, watch out and be prepared.
The great irony of all this, Ryan, has been the level at which the media has for years said that violence is a right-wing tactic. And there is this panic that they try to start over these various groups who are espousing violence. And we've been victims of some of those smears before. But violence, at least political violence, is the tool of the left. And ultimately, anarchy is what these folks want, because they believe that the system and really the entire Western civilization is corrupted, is bent beyond measure, and only its destruction and rebuilding upon it is going to fix it. And so, yes, Mike, if they don't see that progress happening in this nice slow march through the institutions, they are going to tear down the institutions themselves. And they will freely admit this from inside these institutions, from inside these universities, from even inside private companies, that it is our responsibility to take these resources and to use them for the cause of social justice. But really, this is what we are describing is this sort of global communist project. And yes, the federal government, what should the federal government be doing? You brought up, Mike. Let's not forget that the FBI was created in the early 20th century in order to deal with and respond to and prevent assassinations by anarchists. This was a big thing in the turn of the 20th century. We need to be on our toes about this, and it is really our government's responsibility and the agency that has been tasked with this responsibility to fulfill it. So yeah, that's what I would say with this. I would say yes, people who love America should be on guard. Yes, we should absolutely be talking about this and be aware that these folks will not get the same treatment from the media as they gave us, though we did not do anything. Luigi Mangione, just the sloppy French kiss that the media gave him, I think encouraged, just like we said it would, a lot of copycats. And it signaled that you will not be a pariah for committing assassinations and violence. You will actually become a hero. You will become a martyr for the good cause, comrade. And this is something that the FBI should be dealing with very harshly, very swiftly, in order to right the ship and bring order back so that it is communicated. You will not be able to do this and be celebrated. You will be prosecuted. Hopefully, if you have indeed done these acts, you will be executed summarily.
Well, some harsh words for Mr. Beck, but I think they're warranted. These are serious times, and we ought to be clear-eyed about what exactly they are. It's why I flagged a couple of these things, just for folks to get a gauge of the temperature of the leading left-wing Antifa, et cetera, movements. And with that, we're going to talk about something more positive. That is the big, beautiful bill that passed over the weekend and was signed into law really on Friday. So we wanted to get someone who knows a lot about it. Lincoln alum of the Claremont Institute, Eric Teetsel. He's the CEO for the Center for Renewing America, the excellent organization that was founded by Russ Vought, who Russ is now running OMB for the Trump administration for the second time. And Eric was working with Russ there and took over for him. And Eric has a long career in legislative affairs and the think tank world, chief of staff to Senator Josh Hawley, among other experience. So, Eric, we thought we might get you on here to talk about the to the extent that you want to, or the extent you want to highlight stuff. What's the good, the bad, and the ugly of the OBBB as it's been dubbed?
The OB.
Yeah, the OB.
Well, thanks, Ryan. It's great to be with you, and great to see my friends, Mr. Beck and Mr. Sabo. Hope y'all are doing well. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to talk about this, and I'm happy to talk about it in as much depth or as little sort of like wonky nonsense as you and your listeners would prefer. I'll just start with a little bit of framing, and then let you take it from here. We'll talk about whatever you want. The process of reconciliation has become one of the very few ways that unadministration can actually move the ball forward on their agenda outside of executive action. There are a couple of what we on the Hill would refer to as vehicles that you can rely on to move. That's a legislative vehicle in any given year. An appropriations bill would be an example. In some form or fashion, we have to fund ourselves every year. And that always gets complicated largely because people recognize it's one of few opportunities that they can attach their priority to. Another one would be the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, which has been done every year reliably and becomes a sort of a Christmas tree that you can hang your priorities on. Both of those processes, however, require bipartisan agreement to get 60 votes in the Senate to move them forward. And that's largely why they're terrible, because of the process that's required to do them. Reconciliation is unique in that it can be done in the Senate with just a majority, 50 votes plus the vice president breaking a tie. So you don't need Democrats in order to advance your agenda. Or if you're a Democratic administration, of course, you wouldn't need Republicans to advance your agenda. It is cabined. There's only so much that you can do through reconciliation. And we can talk more about those details. But there are fairly wide parameters. And therefore, it's a unique opportunity to move the ball. And President Trump knew that coming in. He knew he'd have a Republican majority in both the House and the Senate, and that reconciliation was going to be a major, major opportunity to advance the ball on a number of fronts. Pretty early on in the process, the administration said, here are our priorities. We want to fund border security and deportations. We want to renew the 2017 tax cut plans, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and do some other work on the sort of taxes and deregulation front. That was a priority. They wanted to move some defense spending into the mandatory side of the bucket. And I can talk more about that. And then fourth, they wanted to raise the debt ceiling, knowing that that was going to be something that would have to be done one way or the other. And better to do it in a partisan fashion in accordance with conservative priorities than to have to cut a deal with Chuck Schumer in order to avoid violating the nation's debt ceiling. So those four priorities were what they started with. And this bill delivers on all four of those primary objectives. It's a huge win on all of those fronts. It does other things too. And this is where you get into the priorities of other members of Congress, namely the Freedom Caucus, and some Senate Republican conservatives as well, who wanted to use this as an opportunity to cut spending. They successfully got to a place where this bill eliminates about $1.5 trillion. Some numbers put it a little bit higher than that in federal spending, which is far and away the largest single cut in federal spending that has ever happened in the history of America. I was in a meeting the other day where someone pointed out that the Medicaid reforms alone in this bill are 3 times the size of the Medicaid reforms that were famously done by Newt Gingrich in the new Republican Congress in the mid-90s. That's the size and scope of the accomplishment that we're talking about. Now, it is also true that in this case, as in every case, there's the world of what could have been done potentially, right? And there are certainly those in our movement who are saying, rightly, we have potentially a catastrophic debt and deficit crisis on our hands. And cutting $1.5 trillion is really good. But you know what would be better? Cutting $2 trillion, cutting $2.5 trillion. They're not wrong. I agree. It would be better to do that. It'd be better to go deeper into Medicaid reform. It'd be better to do a whole host of things. And they fought to get those things done, leading us to the point where the Overton window was moved to where $1.5 trillion is what is accomplished. And it's a landmark achievement. And I think they should be very proud of where we ended up in this, while at the same time getting some rest, girding up their loins, and coming back to get the rest on the next one.
Could you talk a little bit, Eric, about the nature of those Medicaid cuts? The left, of course, is demagoguing this as they have since at least the 80s. You know, it's always the same. Republicans pass legislation, and women and children will die. But my understanding, and you can sort of embellish or correct me if I'm wrong, is a lot of this is cutting back on this ratchet effect that has happened in recent years with the rise of especially disability under Medicaid and the growing sense in which these healthcare provisions from the Great Society have bloated into really sort of welfare for plenty of able-bodied Americans through fraud or fibbing or just lack of any incentive to get off of them.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this. Not my area of absolute expertise, but I've had to try to get smart quickly, and some of you all may know more than me. Let's start with Obamacare. So the ACA is passed 2008, 2009, 15 years ago. And in hindsight, the shortcut understanding of what Obamacare does is a massive expansion of the people who are eligible for Medicaid. So you had this population, the traditional population that we would think of, who would be in need of medical care due to their impoverished state, single moms with multiple kids, right? That's the Medicaid population traditionally understood. What Obamacare did is it said, we need to expand that. We can't get Medicare for all done. We can't get universal federal health care done. So let's just creep Medicaid out until it eventually covers more and more of the population. Namely, that population was able-bodied working age men, a population that most of us, especially conservatives, would say, why are these folks on Medicaid? Why don't they have a job? And nevertheless, that's not the view of the left. It wasn't the view under Obamacare. And so they expanded the population to cover those folks. And then they incentivized states to play their part in the expansion of Medicaid. Medicaid's a program where the federal government covers a large portion of the medical costs for people who are covered, and states cover the rest. With the traditional population, the federal portion that's covered is between 50 and 70%. With the expansion population after Obamacare, it's 90% federal coverage. So the federal government, so we're clear about this, covers a much higher percentage of the cost of care for the people who should be on Medicaid the least, right? And that's the expansion population. One of the things that conservatives wanted to do in this reconciliation bill that the left, as you point out, Ryan, is crying is going to kill women and children, was simply to lower the matching rate for the expansion population so that it was the same as the traditional population. That's the egregious error that they're claiming is going to kill people, that working age, able-bodied men would have their health care subsidized by federal taxpayers at the same rate as single moms with kids. That's one of the reforms that saves hundreds of billions of dollars. I've got another one that they wanted to do, work requirements, which we alluded to already. They expanded the requirement that those who are eligible for Medicaid be required to do some work in the hopes that we are lifting people up and putting them in a position to experience the joy and the dignity of eventually being able to provide for themselves again, right? That's the goal, especially for that working age male population. And then there's a third piece, and I'll stop rambling, which has to do with something called provider taxes. Are you all familiar with this at all? It's basically a giant money laundering scheme that states use to underscore their budgets. So you have this match, right? The federal government pays a certain percentage, the states cover the rest. What states figured out is if they tax Medicaid service providers and then add the cost of that tax that they've applied to the bill they send to the federal government, they can juice the amount of money they're getting from the federal government. And so they've been jacking up the tax rates that they charge on Medicaid providers in order to bolster their state budgets. And then they send some of that money back to the Medicaid providers as a sort of hat tip thank you for being a part of our scheme. One of the things that conservatives wanted to do in this bill was simply to cap what that tax would be, not to get rid of it, not to eliminate it entirely as the money laundering scheme is that it is, but simply to say, fine, you can juice us for the money, but only at a rate of 3 or 4%, not the 6 or 8 or 13% that states might otherwise charge. And again, this just leads to the howls and cries from folks who say that we want to kill children as a result.
It's been typical of modern programmatic liberalism, right? All quote unquote progress which has been made on social service provision by the federal government, which the left seems to define as the feds spending more of that pie. Any retrenchment on it through normal legislative processes is somehow per se illegitimate. It only gets to get ratcheted up. It never gets to get ratcheted back. Well, thank you, Eric. You weren't rambling at all. That's very helpful. I'm going to get Mike or Andrew to jump in on this, ask you anything they want.
Yeah, Eric, it's great having you on the podcast. And so I've been looking at, it looks like some of the polls suggest that this bill might not be hugely popular. Obviously, I think I saw one poll that said, 2% of Democrats were in support of it, but it said only 67% of Republicans. And it said, even a majority, might be underwater in terms of Medicaid, what they did there. How do you do you see that more as like a comms issue? Do you see some of the priorities maybe not meshing exactly with what, the new right's looking for, that some portions of it don't seem to be as concerned with, making tons of fiscal cuts and making kind of the Thomas Massey, Rand Paul kind of fiscal stand? What are your kind of thoughts on navigating, those fissures?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. I think that it probably does boil down to a communication question on the one hand, but also partly to the substance of what it is that was attempted to be accomplished, right? On the tax side, which is central to this whole thing, most of the benefits are on sort of the business side, right? We're talking about R&D expensing stuff and deregulatory stuff that is going to benefit Americans widely, but not in the absolute direct way that the sorts of like direct cash payments we were doing under COVID would have affected people in a direct way. There is some personal side stuff that's included in this. It expands the child tax credit, for example, and makes it permanent at a rate of $2,200 a kid, up from $2,000 and tied to inflation. People will experience that and they'll probably appreciate it. There's the Trump baby accounts that are part of it, where the federal government's going to put $1,000 in basically a 401k for everyone who's born, that people can contribute to tax-free and grow as a nest egg for people. I think in time that will be seen as very popular, but a lot of that's probably just lost in the messaging and then crowded out by some of the bigger picture elements of the bill.
So maybe this is just me, Eric, from having been in this movement, in these circles, when it comes to both conservatives, libertarians, and of course, the moment that I came into 10, 12 years ago was this more of like a post-fusionist environment, right? And you kind of thought that fusionism was over. It was sort of flash in the pan. And now there's just been this irreconcilable divide now between the more fiscally minded libertarians and the more socially minded conservatives. It seems to me that both with this administration and with the inclusion of folks who are new to this coalition, and then this bill, it feels like we're in this moment of this sort of fusionism 2.0, the sort of 21st century fusionism, and that the OBBB is maybe a triumph of that fusionism. And so for one side, in this case, it is more our libertarian friends to be saying that it either doesn't go far enough or it still includes some things that we don't want in there, but have been included for political expediency. I mean, would you agree? Would you say that we should be messaging this as this triumph of a coalition of various folks from different camps that have different priorities, and we have created something that is going to be both reducing waste, that is going to be improving the quality of life of people here in America, and is going to be giving everybody, not everything what they want, but much of what they have wanted for quite a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's well said, Andrew. And I do think it is kind of a remarkable achievement when you look at it and think about it. You're talking about a bill that brings together the priorities of Jim Banks and Chip Roy and Lisa Murkowski. Yeah, that's remarkable.
It's a motley crew.
It's first and foremost a testament, I think, to Donald Trump and to the recognition that he is the center of political gravity and dictates the agenda. And people can push and bob and weave and try to advance their own agendas within that context. But at the end of the day, he's the leader. He's going to get what he wants, and he did. And he got a lot of help from Mike Johnson and John Thune and others to get it there. But they listen to him and they take direction from him, and it's very reflective of him insofar as it's the priorities that he set out to achieve in this bill. There's already talk, I should say, of a second and a third reconciliation bill. And it's not quite clear yet exactly what those might entail. But suffice it to say, a lot of people feel like there are priorities, myriad priorities that were sort of left on the cutting room floor from this process. And they're going to pick those back up and drive them. I could see them being in a number of areas, the personal side of tax reform, more on entitlements and Medicaid, and on. Education, probably.
Yeah, I'm curious, Eric, and I don't know how much you know about this process. So if you're not that familiar with it, feel free to punt. But I'm our one of our friends, a mutual friend of ours, and a former Lincoln Fellow himself, James Braid, runs the Office of Legislative Affairs at the White House. What is James's life like now? Hopefully, he's getting some rest. But what is the day-to-day work of that office when they're in the pressure cooker of this kind of thing?
Nonstop.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just we should all be grateful to James and the rest of the team there who have been working 18-hour days for months, probably, to try to get this thing over the line. And the sheer number of relationships that they're trying to manage, priorities that they're trying to balance, communication that they're trying to facilitate, getting the right voices in the right rooms at the right times to move the thing forward so you can get it across the line is hard to fathom. And there are a lot of voices who played a part of that. I'm proud to say that Russ, who you mentioned, who's a friend of all of ours, was an integral part of this, largely in speaking to some of the more libertarian, sort of traditional spending, fiscal conservative types, especially in the Freedom Caucus, but in the Senate too, and reassuring them how these numbers add up and what the broader context outside of reconciliation is that should give them confidence that we are doing things to tackle America's spending problems, even if not to the full extent they might have wished within the OBBB.
Yeah. Mike asked the question of politics and polling. Do you think, I mean, I get the sense that at the very least, even if some of the tangible benefits are a little longer tail, as you mentioned, for some of the constituents involved, that, I mean, something had to have passed. To pass nothing would have been a disaster that would have been very bad for the midterms coming up. So just the fact that you got a lot of priorities advanced and a big bill completed is in and of itself a victory and should be politically salutary as we head into 2026.
100%. And there were absolutely moments where I and others wondered and feared that we were heading into sort of an intractable breakdown where you had a coalition of between 3 and 25 House members who were just going to be a no, and a small handful of Republican senators at the opposite end of the spectrum pulling in the opposite direction. And it was not at all clear how you were going to break that logjam, but they were able to do it and overcome. Many people thought that doing one big reconciliation bill was a strategic error early on for precisely that reason. The risks were just so great. We were arguing, do a quick one out of the gate, get some wins on the board and then come back to the rest. But much credit to the team, people who are smarter and more strategic than me, who saw the possibility and were able to get this thing over the line by their self-imposed deadline. It's pretty incredible.
Right. Yeah. They didn't even have to delay the July 4 deadline, which we mentioned on a previous segment that we honored the vice president on Saturday in San Diego. And my worry for the 2 weeks leading up to it was that he was going to cancel because he had to fly back to break a tie in the Senate. So.
Well, I'm glad they could do that for you, Ryan.
Yeah, me too. Well, good. Well, thanks, Eric. We wanted to wrap up with what we usually do, which is to ask everyone for some recommendations, what they're reading, watching, or whatever. What are you enjoying right now to take your mind off the grind of DC?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. So, and I'll share a lesson that I've learned that you all might enjoy, and inspired in part by my Lincoln experience, because I made stickers as a result of this, which I learned from you all. So I'm reading this book about eagles bald eagles. And it starts with kind of the story of America's founding and getting to the point where the bald eagle was our national symbol. By the way, it's never been in statute that the eagle is our national symbol. I keep waiting for some congressman to pick this up and push it as their agenda and just win re-election with nothing at all. But of course, people famously know that Ben Franklin hated the eagle and advocated for turkeys as a more noble bird. And there's some argument for that. But the best anecdote I got from this is the Declaration of Independence gets done, and they recognize, we're a country now. We need a seal. Real nations have seals on their documents. So, of course, they created a subcommittee to come up with America's national seal. And it was Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Ben Franklin. And these guys bat around ideas, ultimately completely fail. Congress is like, these are terrible ideas. It wasn't until 4 subcommittees later and 11 years later that they finally settled on the seal that we have today. But Ben Franklin's first proposal was an image of Moses looking over the Red Sea as the Egyptian army drowns. And around the outside of the seal, it would say, "Resistance to tyrants is obedience to God."
Incredibly based.
Oh, I love that.
So I went ahead and asked ChatGPT to draw that up for me, and I've got some stickers I'll send your way.
Oh, nice.
What should have been America's national seal.
I think that is
we settled
provoking
on
our British friends, right? You're the Egyptians that are trying to keep us in slavery. Better for diplomacy that we just pick an eagle.
Yeah.
Well, the eagle is now our one big beautiful bird and has been for a long time.
Amen.
What about you, Mike?
So I saw the New York Times, they put out, I think it was like the top 100 films of the 2000s, I think. And I, kind of read through them, was curious about the number one. It was the movie Parasite that came out, I think a few years ago now, if I remember correctly. So I hadn't watched that, finally watched that. It definitely should not have been number one. Not surprising though. I mean, some of these movies were in there and were ordered the way they were. I mean, some of the directors they went over were what they didn't mention was astounding. Titus Teixeira, I think he was a Lincoln Fellow with us. Publius. So he had actually at his Substack, Postmodern Conservative, had a great kind of critique of that list, and then offered a bunch of alternative films and things that he thought were far better than especially some of the top 10. So I'm actually going through his list right now. And so far, I mean, it's really embarrassing kind of where we are as a culture, especially high culture at the New York Times, supposedly. So it's great to see him, do important work in film. And I'm going through that list, and I'll definitely report back any other good movies that I see.
Parasite was that Korean film about class warfare and
yes,
psychological, darkness, right? Basically.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Oh, good. Thanks, Mike. What about you, Andrew?
Yeah, so I am watching sci-fi animations of the Warhammer 40K variety.
what if I can channel my boomer in the audience? What is Warhammer 40K?
Okay.
Or Warhammer 40K?
Warhammer 40K or Warhammer 40,000 is a tabletop board game, really, of various figurines that you purchase and you paint, and then you play this very complicated board game with. However, it sort of expanded as things that become popular with young men, increasingly older men, famously now Henry Cavill. They really turn into these media franchises as well. And so there's a bunch of books that have explained all the different lore, and there is now even these animated films that come out. They also have video games that have been very popular. The Warhammer universe is one where you have these various factions, the Imperium of Man, and all these other Xenos or sort of alien factions, all sort of fighting in this endless conflict across the stars. It is very dark. It is very nihilistic, and it's also just incredibly awesome. And so highly recommend at least checking out Warhammer, both the computer games and particularly this series called Hammer and Bolter, which you can watch on various places, is something that I've been I've been looking at it, and yeah, like the stories, the animation are of course good. They're relatively short skits, but I think what draws me to Warhammer, and maybe many people who are sort of in our circles, is the future it's showing you is one where we win, but we win without God, and you win without being tied to and building upon the civilization that you have. It is one where technology is worshipped, and where war is the norm, and the only way in which you get your way is purely by force. There is no reason, there is no religion other than the religion of force and of war, and so it's one where I like to hold it up not as something either that is idealistic or completely unrealistic either. It's actually something where if you put us on a far enough timeline and we forget God that ultimately guided us and guided our civilization, that's ultimately where we are going to fall. So yes, there's me revealing I'm a bit of a dweeb when it comes to Warhammer, and then also the maybe some cautionary tales in it for us.
Yeah, anyone who's in North Texas, there's in Grapevine, not too far from the Claremont Institute offices, or at least the Texas offices, there's a Warhammer 40K cafe and also some sort of official headquarters. I've not peeked my head into either, but you got to go do some reconnaissance there, Andrew.
Now that we have talked about it on the podcast, Ryan, we're going to have to go down there and be like, hi, yeah, we're from the Claremont Institute. We're a think tank.
We've been promoting you on our podcast. Good. Well, we're right up against the time limit, so I'll just say quickly, and this is kind of ho-hum at this point. It's old, but I'm just rewatching The Wire, which grows better every time I watch it. And I will still maintain that the first breakout HBO prestige TV show is better. That is The Sopranos. I know some of my friends disagree vehemently and like either The Wire or FX's Breaking Bad, but they're all good, and I'm enjoying The Wire. Just the writing, the characters, the acting, and the sort of tapestry of the whole story holds up pretty well. I will warn everyone who hasn't seen it, it's pretty profane and there's a lot of violence in it. So definitely not a family show. Well, with that, I think we'll wrap up. And thank you all once again for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to follow our work, go to www.claremont.org. I will put in a plug also if you want to follow all the things that Eric and his team at the Center for Renewing America are doing. Go to americarenewing.com and check out their work. It's excellent. One of the few effective and principled kind of post-Trump think tanks. Not that they endorse candidates, none of us do, but sort of trying to carry the conversation forward. As always, you can find all of our stuff at americanmind.org as well, and ClaremontReviewBooks.com. Go to dc.claremont.org for what we're doing at our Center for the American Way of Life, and please rate us and review and spread the good word of the Roundtable podcast. Thanks to the production and engineering team, the brothers Gannon, Ryan, and Jake. And thank you all for listening. We will talk to you next week.